you're back. That was super interesting. Thank you so much, Stephen, and to all the great panelists on that DeFi panel. We are now going to shift to the guy who has to keep us all safe, Him Das, who is now the acting FinCEN Director. So many of the issues on this conference, touch on not just regulation, but also national security. And it's just a delight to have him here with us. I mean, Him has a wonderful history, very interesting history with K2, and he's been in government before. And I know he's been very busy in this new position. And I just want to say thank you so much for being able to join us for DC FinTech Week.
Thanks so much, Chris, for just inviting me to the conversation. It's been a whirlwind for the last month or so since I've been on board, but it's a pleasure to speak with you and all the participants in DC FinTech Week. So it's great to be here. I just want to say that I'm just honored to serve at FinCEN and to serve and support both the institution, its clients and customers, the private sector, civil society stakeholders, law enforcement and supervisory community, and most importantly, the American public. So thanks again.
Well, we're not FinCEN, but we try to do the same thing with DC FinTech Week, and we'll be talking right afterwards with Chris Inglis from the White House on some other sort of related areas, and maybe. You are just now sort of starting out and getting a lay of the land. It's a really important job. It's a really interesting job, and FinTech itself is always evolving. Maybe we can just start from a 10,000-foot level and maybe give a little bit of context as to sort of your perspective and where you're coming from. You're coming to the job, and then maybe to sort of identify what areas of the FinTech ecosystem tend to be presenting or generating the greatest urgency for you, at least at this early stage.
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. First of all, I just want to reinforce the fact that, and it was something that was very true when I was in the private sector, and it's very true here at FinCEN, is that we just have a shared responsibility to protect the integrity of the U.S. and the global financial system. And, it's even more true that, we at FinCEN can't achieve our statutory mandate without collaborating and cooperating with the FinTech community, the innovators in the financial community as well. And one of the most important things for me is that we have active engagement with the private sector to understand where technology is going, both in terms of how it can benefit the American public, enhance financial inclusion, but also how it can be used to protect the financial system at the same time. In terms of some of the areas that I think FinCEN as an institution is very focused on right now, I just want to highlight a couple of areas. One is that we are very focused on implementation of the Anti-Money Laundering Act, or the AML Act, which was passed at the beginning of the year. The AML Act it represents a re-envisioning or a paradigm shift in terms of how FinCEN works and the ways in which we do business. I can't stress this enough. One of my colleagues referred to it as a transition from the diesel age to the nuclear age. But the Act expands FinCEN's mission in a number of important ways. It puts the protection of U.S. national security at the core of our mission as a statutory mandate, along with protecting the U.S. Financial system from criminal abuse. It highlights the prevention of money laundering and terrorist financing as part of our mission as well. And it reinforces that financial institutions' AML-CFT compliance programs should be risk-based, and that's a very important point. It places a premium on both information sharing with all stakeholders, public and private, domestic and international. And it just encourages greater analysis and assessment of risk based on our information collection effort. So it's a two-way information sharing effort. And importantly, again, for this community as well, is that the legislation instructs us to encourage technological innovation and the adoption of new technologies to achieve these goals. I mean, ultimately, the Act provides just an important moment for us to work with all stakeholders to consider what is working, what isn't working, and to modernize and update our rules to just deal with new and emerging threats, to take stock of what's happening with respect to technological advances and innovation, and to consider what the contributions are from a positive perspective, what concerns it raises with respect to financial integrity, and then to sort of work forward in terms of a common purpose. So that's sort of piece number one. I think I just wanted to add one more element is that number two, we're just focused on combating ransomware as well. We're spending a lot of time and effort on this. And we're working with our interagency partners across the board with the White House and the NSC on a number of different fronts with respect to ransomware as well. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, ransomware is a big issue. There was some really interesting news coming out in terms of just how active FinCEN has been in sort of thinking about those issues, and they really deserve a lot of attention. I did want to say, that's really very helpful and very useful, even thinking about the statutory element. I think whether or not we're academics or whether or not, we're international agencies are very involved in this conference, or whether or not you're on the private sector, it's just useful to sort of understand where the mandate is and where, the statutory orientation of any particular governmental agency is and how it evolves. When you think about the national security component being a little bit more prominent, and we were just leaving a conversation on DeFi and decentralized finance, does that, does the mandate in any way sort of inform the way in which you think about an issue like DeFi? Are there any particular points of concern in that particular space? We'll get to ransomware earlier, though I guess I'm going to bring up the DeFi first because we got into an earlier chicken and egg conversation about illicit activity versus ransomware and what comes first and the like. So I guess we're going to start off, if you don't mind, with this kind of a DeFi conversation in terms of where you're looking at it. Are there changes with your mandate that inform how you view it and the like?
So again, I think that from our perspective, I think we're carefully looking at DeFi projects to fully understand how they work, so that we can find ways to mitigate any illicit finance threats, really, but without disrupting innovation. I think we are focused on just engagement with our partners, both within the US government as well as those in the private sector, just to learn more and to discuss the issues in terms of the positives and some of the risks as well. I think an important point with respect to DeFi that's worth noting is that many projects that call themselves DeFi are just not necessarily as decentralized as they might advertise. And I think the consequence is that many of the projects may already have obligations under the BSA. And I'm sorry, my lights just go off automatically when I don't move. So I just need to turn them back on. But a lot of projects may already have obligations under the BSA, depending on how they're structured. Many like DeFi projects are developing rapidly. Many of them are foreign-based and may have no obligations under the BSA, or think that they might not have any obligations under the BSA. But ultimately, if they are offering money transmission services to the US market, I think that they might be mistaken in terms of the scope of their regulatory obligations. Coming back to your national security question, I think the mandate really goes to a couple of different elements. One is what the regulatory scope is and defining what that regulatory scope is. And we've engaged on that in a number of fronts separate from the AML Act, but also in the context of the AML Act, and we're working on that. A second is just a greater focus on assessment and analysis of the data that comes into us. And the third piece of it is just working with innovators across the board and engaging with them to better understand what their concerns are from a regulatory perspective and to better understand the risks as well.
Yeah, that's very, very, very helpful. Your point in particular about, some entities may think that they're lying outside of the BSA or certain kinds of reporting obligations, when in fact they may. How do you view FinCEN's role in sort of bringing the activities into the regulatory perimeter? I mean, are you seeing industry responses in terms of compliance that you're finding relatively interesting? Are there kinds of responses that you're finding less interesting, or even inadequate? And again, I know you're very early on, but are you getting a sense as to what potential solutions may look like, given the fact that you do have new kinds of operational systems and infrastructures coming to market?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I mean, I think I'll start with some of our perspectives from the inadequacy part, and then maybe, because we're always looking to make things better, but also then touch upon sort of where we're seeing some progress. I mean, as you know, FinCEN is dedicating an incredible amount of attention to virtual currencies. And, I don't think it comes as a big surprise. There's a huge growth of virtual currency use. And I don't think it's also come as a surprise that there are a huge number of challenges with respect to maintaining integrity with respect to virtual currency use. I think one of the areas that we're focused on in terms of inadequacy is that we're just monitoring and considering risks associated with technology that just fully anonymizes transactions more generally, regardless of the mechanism that's employed, whether, for example, it's a cryptocurrency that runs on an opaque blockchain or has a mixing protocol, or wallets or entities that offer mixing or tumbling services as well. Anonymizing features help enhance the protection of privacy, and that's an important and underlying purpose, but they also conceal transaction trails that facilitate criminal activity. The second piece that we're just very focused on is jurisdictional arbitrage. Uneven or non-existent regulation and supervision of virtual currency exchanges across jurisdictions is problematic. It allows criminals to exploit gaps in the system. And this is a huge challenge. The Treasury Department is focused on it with members of FATF. And we're working with other countries on a regular basis so that illicit actors just don't gravitate across jurisdictions. I mean, I think in terms of some of the positives, I think I want to recognize, of course, that companies have invested in dynamic and innovative processes that have contributed to the safety and stability of the marketplace. I think that there's innovative fintech that's been developed. For example, commercially available blockchain analysis software tools have greatly benefited regulators and law enforcement as well in terms of combating illicit activity. We've seen increased registration and reporting by CVC businesses. So I think it's safe to say that compliance is improving. I think we've seen advances in the use of AI and machine learning and federated analytic techniques, and the use of data as well to better discover illicit activities and to assist financial institutions and law enforcement. I think that this is an area that we're keeping an eye on. Again, fintech is rapidly developing and evolving. And I think we have to work together with industry to learn about and manage risks in real time. From a FinCEN perspective, we've set up innovation hours where we regularly engage with the private sector. And the goal is twofold. One is to better understand what concerns are with respect to regulatory implications for industry as well. But the other big piece of it is just to be able to understand the technology, because it is advancing so rapidly, and we can't on a regular basis keep up to date on things, and we're doing our best to do that.
Yeah, that innovation and the sort of speed of innovation issue is super interesting, because it's a challenge and then an opportunity potentially, depending on the context. I did want to give you the opportunity, since you had brought it up earlier, just on that ransomware question, or perhaps there's another. I mean, typically, and I'm sure you've already seen, as coming to FinCEN, the questions that you get will overwhelmingly be sort of in the crypto space, because that's where a lot of the energy is, and that's where the speed of a lot of new sort of innovation is coming, and of course in machine learning and AI. Are there any your job is to think about things that keep everybody up at night, but are there any particular things that keep you up at night more than others? I mean, is it the ransomware issue, or is it other forms of illicit finance and or cybersecurity risks that you think are particularly troublesome? What's sort of most distressing for you?
These are all challenges. First of all, I just want to stress that it's not technological innovation or that keeps me up at night. I mean, technological innovation is important, and there are many positive benefits from technological advancement and innovation. It is really the criminals and the terrorists and the ransomware attackers that leverage innovative technology for purposes that it's not really intended to serve, right? And exploiting elements of technological advancement in ways that aren't intended. And it's important to try to just keep ahead or keep up to date on what those technological advancements are, to be able to understand what the potential for exploitation is, how criminals might be able to exploit those technological advances, and to address them. But we certainly are not in a position of wanting to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to encourage and ensure that technological innovation grows, because it does provide positive benefits. I mean, I could go on at length about ransomware and some of the challenges that it presents for the US government, for governments more generally as well. I mean, ransomware is a huge problem, and we're incredibly focused on it. They've targeted virtually every sector of the economy. They almost always demand their payment in virtual currencies. They become more selective in choosing victims, both in terms of targeting larger enterprises and demanding bigger payouts. They're, using new revenue streams, for example, ransomware as a service or double extortion, and they're finding new ways to hide their entities and move money by increasingly using anonymized virtual currencies as well. And so it presents a huge effort. And our response has been to deploy a wide range of financial enforcement and other actions as well, including enforcement and sanctions, guidance and advisories, and public and private partnerships. And again, this comes back to my earliest point, which is it's a shared effort. We're looking to work with you to better understand what is happening out there, and to get information into the financial community and the fintech community so that we can be more effective in terms of collecting information, understanding trends and typologies, and then creating a virtuous feedback loop.
Well, I'm going to sleep now at night, but after hearing that list, but I will sleep perhaps a little bit better knowing that you are on the job. We didn't have enough time, but we will be speaking to other people in the conference with people like raising up issues that are tangential, like digital identity. I know that there's been some effort to think about how do you keep people out as well as bring the good people in, and financial inclusion. It's a full plate. It's a really interesting plate. And I know you're busy dealing with it all, but I did want to again thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Chris, and again, thanks to everybody in terms of working with FinCEN, and we look forward to working with all of you as well.
Great. Well, we'll switch now to our next flash presentation, and then to the White House.